different strategies that you've been focusing on and studying through our rotational learning course. And we really wanted to be able to take an opportunity to just meet with you very briefly and provide some structure and some ideas over what are some key strategies for implementation when we're talking about when you're implementing the rotational learning model particularly. We think that it's really important that what we've noticed is that as teachers implement rotational learning, there are some key features that they have used in the implementation process that we've seen the most success as successful implementations. So what are some of those things? In this case, one of the things that you've seen us use and that we've talked about before is having a visual timer. So the timer itself is not just simply for you or not just simply for your students, but it's for both of you so that your students know how much time is remaining in each station, as well as for yourself to know how much time do you have remaining when you're working with students in this direct capacity. So it's important to have some type of timer. We talk about having that visual timer. You can order them off Amazon and other places. It needs to be big enough, particularly for all students to be able to see that timer. And the same part that it's important to spend the time equally in the rotations that you're in. So that if you think, oh, I'm going to give a little bit more time to this group and less time to the other groups, we have to remember that we are responsible to really excel and help the students who are advanced, even advance more and grow those students just as much as we're responsible to help students remediate, to be able to truly understand where some of those learning deficiencies are.
And I think one of the things that we have seen when teachers have given that extra time, that by the time they get through the third rotation, there's really not a lot of time in that third rotation. So that third rotation really suffers. Like the students that are at the independent station and the collaborative station start to say, well, why should we even get started? We only have, 10 minutes left in the rotation. So those are just some of the things that we have kind of come across over the last few years, just realizing that it's really important to kind of just keep those equal time frames.
Right. Yeah, so some teachers will say, no, I really need extra time to focus with this group of kids and I can let those other ones go because they're fine, they understand it, and they're okay. But then that's in contra to the argument of how are we growing these other students just the same. So as we continue to focus on the key strategies, one of the other key strategies that we want to continually focus on is use of the digital agenda. So that could be called a hybrid agenda, it could be called a rotational learning agenda, a digital agenda. We say digital, although it doesn't always have to be in that digital format. But the point of it is that it's really the roadmap to success. So when students come into the classroom, they need to be able to open up the agenda to see what's the work going to be today that I need to cover, that I need to work through. What am I going to be studying in direct? What am I going to be doing in independent? What am I going to be doing in collaborative? So we find that it's really important to make sure that the agenda is detailed enough so that students don't get lost.
Yeah.
We have some due dates on it, some checklists of items that students need to complete while they're in the independent and the collaborative activities, and also any extension activities that students are going to need to do. So what do you do when students are finished but still have some more time in that rotation? And that's where that extended activities, and sometimes we call it the extended toolbox, really comes into play.
Yeah, and I think the items that are on there, we try to highlight the ones that we have found to be the most successful for the students as well as for the teacher. The due dates have been huge. Like putting a due date that this is the final date that something is due is really, really helpful for students so that they know that, like, not always will they finish the work in that particular rotation, and it might be 2 or 3 days down the road. And we've even found teachers that, you know, they will give an extra day or two for the kids that might be absent or, you know, because of assemblies or that kind of thing. They'll always add they'll pad a day or two and say, well, this will be the final date it's due. probably will finish it maybe on Wednesday, but we want to make sure that everybody turns it in by Friday. And that kind of helps teachers and students to make sure that the students are getting the work in, and then the teachers don't have to constantly be giving zeros to students or hounding students. The checklists have been really, really beneficial for students, because when they are rotating, they may only get through steps 1 and 2, and then the next day they come in, so they know where they left off. Especially if you're running a weekly agenda, it's helpful to know where they left off. So the checklists have been really helpful, even, and especially for the low level students. The students seem to work really well, that they can just say, yep, I checked, I did this, I submitted that assignment, and they check it off.
And, it could be a daily agenda, or it could be a weekly agenda. So it's really going to be driven by your content needs, your grade levels, and the activities, that you would have for them to be able to take part of.
Right.
In addition to that, I think that the thing that we have to focus on more and more and more is the accountability in each one of those stations with the activities that students are doing. So again, when we're talking about key strategies to success, we're talking about what levels of accountability do you have put into place for students while they're in independent, for students while they're in collaborative, and of course for students while they're with you in direct, because we want to make sure that they understand that the work that they're doing in these 3 different modalities of learning, in the direct, independent, and collaborative, are connected together, and that they're studying and they're working and they're all learning opportunities, and it's not fluff, it's not wasted time, and they're going to be held accountable to getting the work done. They need to become independent learners. So we want to give them those independent activities to do, but we need to hold them accountable. What did they finish? So those different forms of accountability can be anything from formative assessments, some quizzes, journaling, reflection, discussion forums, exit tickets. That's just to name some of the pieces of what you can do for accountability, but you want to make sure that you have some levels of accountability for each one of those stations.
And I think the only thing that I would want to add to that is, if you're putting some type of accountability in those stations, it's really important as the teacher to make sure that you're looking at that accountability component. So if you're having the students do an exit ticket, there's some kind of feedback from the teacher, so that the students are saying, well, she is really checking on what I'm doing on a daily basis.
Yeah, because if you do a discussion forum and then the teacher never responds, the students know, well, they didn't even read the discussion forum.
And they pick that up very quickly. And once they pick that up, then they start to really fluff on what they're doing in that particular station. So it is really important to make sure that you're staying on top of that. And we'll give you some tips on ways of doing that, so that you're not spending every single evening
hours beyond hours.
Checking on that.
You don't want to do discussion forums for everything. We can tell you that, to be able to really focus on that work particularly. So, some of the other things that we've talked about that are really important for those, again, the key strategies to having success is really when you first roll out hybrid and this rotational learning, in really spending time with that first week of school, just like you regularly do. When school first opens, you have this list that you go through with your students of what your expectations are for your class, what's the content that they're going to be learning and going through, and what are some of those classroom procedures that are important for you now. We need to do that also for implementing rotational, and even all the more. So you're going to think through your expectations. What are those expectations going to be for when students are with you in direct, for when students are working independently, when students are working in the collaborative? So those things will need to be provided for students with an understanding of what's going on. But we also say that when you start implementing rotational learning, we highly advise that you go full-blown into the rotational model from the very beginning. And you want to stay in the rotational model as long as you can to get the culture established. So it takes time for students to understand what to do in independent, what to do in collaborative, what's going on in direct. So sometimes you can model that as a whole group. So right now it's to start the class. All of us are in direct right now. You show them where direct is, you talk to them about what direct is, and then you actually do some content in the direct manner. And then you set the timer, and then after the timer's up, you go to the next station, you go to independent. and you say, we are all now an independent. This is what independent is. This is my expectations of you in independent. This is what you need to finish here in independent. Are you allowed to talk? Are you not allowed to talk? And go through all of those procedures. Time's up. We're now moving to collaborative. What does collaborative look like? What's it feel like? What's collaboration really mean? And you go through those expectations, and maybe they actually play a game. Maybe they actually solve a problem. Maybe they do a breakout, some type of activity where the students have to start beginning to work together. So that's when we say run the rotational model together as a group, as a whole class. Some classes do that for a couple days.
Yeah.
When moving through that.
Sometimes a week. And especially if you're looking at like first grade or second grade, it might take a little longer that
Right.
you need to do those full group rotations. I think the only other thing that I would probably add is that this is a perfect opportunity to really facilitate what you want to happen in each of those stations. So as students are working independently, if your guideline was, hey, I want absolutely no talking. If you get stuck, you can ask your neighbor, but you're responsible to fill something out, then you start to facilitate those procedures in your classroom. So if I'm stuck and I'm permitted to ask my neighbor and Ken's my neighbor, as the teacher, you would want to start to facilitate to say, hey, Colette, remember, you can ask Ken, and then make sure that you're writing down what you're asking him and did he help you? And so kind of facilitating those conversations. Same thing with collaboration. We find that this is a really hard area to get students to work together. So this is a perfect opportunity when you're starting to work with teachers, when you're starting to work with students on what it looks like to work collaboratively. This is the way that you could really start to facilitate the conversations of, hey, this is what I want you to do. You're going to, as your group, figure out what the tasks are, how you're going to divide up what each member of the team is going to be responsible for doing, and how we're going to pull everything together as a team and those kind of things. So
the more time you spend in this beginning stage, the more success that you'll feel as you're implementing and working through that later on in the year. And just like that when you start class in the very beginning, you have to establish that groundwork for the success of your class moving forward. And we're giving you some ideas and some guidelines, but keep in mind that you have to cater this to your specific grade levels.
Right.
So implementing in first grade is different than implementing in 5th or 8th or 12th grade. How you speak with your students, how you interact, and the expectations of your students are different. Just like with the hybrid agenda,
I was just going to say
the hybrid agenda might be more pictorial at the kindergarten and first grade levels until the text starts to happen, more and more text as time goes on.
We've even seen for the hybrid agendas that each agenda would be on each of the stations, and they would be just maybe pictures or, as Ken said,
for those primary levels.
Yeah, for the primary levels, very little text, so that the students know what's, they need to be doing at that station.
So really setting those expectations. We wanted to
highlight
to you, absolutely, because when we start talking about the stations, sometimes teachers will gravitate towards, I'm going to do direct and independent, but collaborative is really hard right now, and I can't figure out how to do some high order thinking projects and things with collaborative, and we kind of let loose on that. If we let loose on that and do not do collaborative, we want you to see the levels of activities that are taking place, particularly through these 3 modalities of learning. So when we talk about blooms, from remembering all the way up through creating, we talk about in the independent station is really the lower level learning.
Absolutely.
Sure, we're encouraging, independency, and we're encouraging them to be able to investigate further on their own, but it's still lower level. You're watching clips, you're doing discussions and things like that, and you're learning content, but it's still at a very low level. When they're working with you in direct, through your questioning techniques, you are taking up the skill sets to where students are engaging with you, interacting with you. They're working more through an application and an analysis of the content at this point, because that's the interaction with you. And that's why that modality of learning in the direct instruction is so vital, so important, to be able to continue to help guide students moving on to those next levels.
And we're definitely meeting the needs of the group that's in front of us. So that changes from the 3 different groups as they're moving through the station.
Absolutely. Yeah. Finally, in order to truly get to the highest levels of learning, the highest levels of thinking, when we're talking about creating, we're talking about evaluating, synthesizing in that case, that's really the activities that we're talking about for collaborative. That's what we want to see take place in this station. So that could be through some project-based learning, problem-based learning, challenge-based learning, inquiry-based learning. That's the type of learning that we're really talking about. We're not talking about we're going to hand out a worksheet here and Colette and I are going to go through and share, you do the odds, I'm going to do the evens, and we're going to work that out. Yeah. And that's not at all what we're talking about. There's a time and place for activities like that. But here we really want students to have some authentic tasks of real world problem solving where they're going to have to elevate to high order thinking skills in that process. So this is why it's so important not to skip one of the stations of the activities because of where the activities are taking place through the levels of learning.
And we're giving them the 3 modalities of learning, right?
Absolutely.
So we're giving them an opportunity to work with their teacher and work independently and work in a team.
Absolutely. So when you start thinking through expectations, we want you to be able to think through, so what would my expectations be for students when they're with me in direct? What are my expectations for students in independent and collaborative? And that's what we want to start thinking through. After we finish here, you're going to have the opportunity to actually develop your own expectations. And you'll be able to write them out and you'll be able to engage in the next activity that we have where you'll think through this and brainstorm a bit and then actually develop your expectations. So there's some things that we want you to think about. And in that, thinking through what are some of the activities that are going to be taking place in those stations. So in order to understand what my expectations are of the activity or the expectations of the students, I need to know what activities are taking place. So in direct, you're not pigeonholed to this is just where you use your slide deck and you're just sharing content all the time. Students can get new content with you. They can get new content in independent from a content provider online. They can also get new content while they're working through problem solving something collaboratively. So in direct, the point is with you, the teacher. You can do many different things with them. So from formative assessments to comparing and contrasting activities, group works, exit tickets, peer tutoring. You could work one-on-one with students and going around while the other students are working with each other on something else. There's multiple things that you can do in direct. Don't feel like you're boxed in with those activities. The point is, though, they're with you.
Right.
So oftentimes your expectations may be a bit different because they're with you and you're driving it, you're helping to facilitate it and everything like that. But we just wanted you to think through what would some of my expectations be with students. So obviously in a class, when you're talking with students, you're engaging with students, what are some of those things that you expect students? If it's in a small group, do they have to raise their hands? Or can they just engage in the conversation?
Right.
We want it to be more natural, right, as a dialogue. So thinking through, well, no, you don't have to raise your hands. You can just engage in that conversation. Right. So what are those things? If they have to use the restroom, are they able to go during direct? Would that be the most appropriate time to go? Or maybe should that be when they're when they're working independently?
Right.
So thinking through some of those things I think are important. A whole other list of activities that can be done while you're an independent. So what goes on independent? So independent doesn't mean they have to be on the computer all the time.
It's true.
Right?
Right.
So what else can they do? So writing prompts and reflections and reading, right? Of course, interactive websites. One of the highlights that we have for independent is this is where we would like to have a good, healthy mixture of independent content providers that's both instruction and skill-based. Instruction meaning that they're getting instruction, they're learning new content, skill-based practicing that content.
Or being on their own learning path as well.
Being on their own learning path.
I think one of the things that I just want to mention as Ken was going over the direct station and the independent station, different activities that I feel like we really need to kind of reinforce is that we really like to see in the classrooms, and so do the students, I believe, is that they're doing different things every day. I think one of the things that we have learned over the years is if you put students on either an instructional based or remediation or content based type of online activity every single day. If they're on Compass every day, or Alex every day,
or IXL, Study Island.
or any of them that are out there, the students will burn out. And they've actually have research showing that the more that they're on it sometimes can be actually a negative effect in growth, because the students get burnt out. And we have found that over the years is that the variety is really, really key in these stations. We don't want to be doing the same things every single day.
You don't want that independent station to be your IXL station. Or to be your Study Island station, even though you have a goal to have so many hours on Study Island and get so many ribbons, and, you know, whatever those competitions might be. The variety is definitely the spice to mix things up, right? That key to success in that whole process.
Because the kids just get burnt out on it, and then they don't put the effort into it. So just having that opportunity for the students to do some different activities, and again, this is just a short list, but at least it can give you an idea of some of the different things that you can do in the independent station. And I know Ken mentioned this, but I'm going to say it again, is that oftentimes when we talk about rotational learning or blended learning or doing small group learning with laptops, right away it's like everything has to be on the computer. And the independent station oftentimes gets coined as that station where that's where the student's going to be on the laptop. But we see some great activities happening in the classrooms that do not involve a laptop in that independent station.
Absolutely.
So just keeping that in mind, that it doesn't have to involve the technology. The reason you want to use the technology is when it's used as a tool that's going to be efficient and an effective use for both the teacher and the student. So
absolutely. So, you know, you think through what would some of those expectations be then that I would have for students while they're in independent. You know, we will tell you this is oftentimes the time that teachers will encourage students to use the facilities or whatever else that they need to during that time, you know, not to interrupt the time that when they're with you in direct. You know, you might have your own policies about cell phone usage, food, drink, but we want you to think through, you know, some time management. What are they going to do when they get stuck? Who are they going to ask for help? If you're busy working with this group up there, how are they going to problem solve and work through some of those things? We are going to talk to you about the confusion card and troubleshooting tips as one of those how to seek help, you know, tools. I remember walking into one teacher's room in the independent station that all of the laptops were facing the wall so that where the teacher was sitting in direct, she could easily scan and just see the laptops or the devices that students are working on so that they didn't have their backs or the actual laptop itself, that they could see what the content was to be able to quickly spot check. But they also had on the wall a question mark and a thumb going to the right and a thumb going to the left, reminding students that if they had any questions, they need to check with the peers to the right, check with the peers to the left. Just some visuals like that. You know, so we want you to start thinking through what are some of your expectations going to be and creating a poster that you would then post at your independent station.
And this is so important in the very beginning of the year. It's just like when you are setting those ground rules and expectations, as Ken mentioned at the very beginning of the year, and when you teach traditionally, it's so important that the students understand these expectations, right? And that's why when you're doing that full group, you just keep referring to these broad expectations that you want to happen in each of these stations, so that when kids are rotating, they know these already, right? They're not, there's no surprises. Like, you know that this is what I'm expecting in that particular station. And with that, what happens if they're not following those expectations, right? We need to make sure that they understand, well, if you're not following the expectations, this is what might occur, you know, so.
And again, you know, this is just an example. There are other examples for primary levels, for middle school levels, for high school levels of what these might look like. But oftentimes when we go into teachers' rooms and work with them, you'll see these expectations posted exactly where the station is and where students are, because it's something you can allude to. You know, when you're pointing out things to students, you can point to things on your poster to remind them.
Did you read the agenda?
About what some of those expectations are.
Yeah, and we have a lot of examples for them.
We do.
Well.
Yeah.
So when
you'll be able to see them like this, that go over some of these items that are on your screen right now. The same thing. You'll be able to take a look at it, ways to be able to dress them up and make them attractive looking for your classes. You know, I think that the same thing from what are the activities that we would do in direct to what are the activities we do in independent, as well as thinking what are some of those high order thinking activities that we can do in collaborative.
Right.
You know, so Here, students are interacting with each other. So your expectations should be that students work together, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we walk into collaborative and you look back at collaborative and you realize nobody's talking to each other,
That's kind of a
something's
problem.
not happening that
Yeah,
should be
that's kind of a
happening, right?
problem.
You know, and yeah, granted, they might all be online and having a discussion at the moment, but there should be interaction. And students, particularly little elementary students, have to understand what's it mean to work together. I do, you do, I do, you do, we do, right? So game strategies, all the way to high school students. High school students are like, no, I got this. I'm good. I don't need to talk to you.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to talk to anybody else. But you know what? We all know that in life, you still have to talk with other people and you have to deal with them. So no matter if you like to, you could be the smartest person in the world, you still need to know how to work with other people. So some different projects that you can do, from, you know, authentic based projects, STEM projects. Your projects might be a couple activities for a couple days, and then into a project that might last a week or might last a couple weeks, to the gold style of project-based learning, you know, that could be all 9 weeks.
Yeah.
Now, when we're talking about that, some people say, well, you know, I need more time to get some of these projects done. And just the rotation time alone isn't enough time for me to get this done. And so we say, well, you know what? That's okay to have some days where you might need to do all collaborative today to work on the project. All the groups are working and they're working through that. That's okay. Now we say, don't do it that way in the very beginning.
Right.
So you get to that flexible time where everybody understands the expectations moving forward. But there's certainly times where you want to do plays and you want to do things, the entire class, some type of project that they're working on, or an assessment, you know, that you might need to move into.
We often see like labs. Labs are done with the entire class doing collaborative labs because, one, safety reasons. So again, we had mentioned this before, it's not a model in the box. So there is some flexibility there, and just to kind of keep that in mind. Because some of the collaborative station projects might need some additional time and might need a full period because of the component that they might be working on.
Right, absolutely. Yeah. So, you know, again, thinking through what are those expectations. So sometimes I would love to be able to see on collaborative station that the expectation is that they need to talk. They need to interact. You must talk. You know, you need to use your words.
This one says noise. I think it should say noise level 3 or
noise
4.
level, right. Should be a little bit higher, because as you're thinking through that, what are the activities that you think you're going to have students doing? So then, you know, what really is going to be your expectation of their behavior during all of them, independent and during collaborative. This is some examples, you know, and of course, this is an example of the poster again that would be hanging somewhere near the collaborative station. But there are many other examples that we have for you, because after all, the real goal of what we're trying to get to here is to help our students really become more independent learners. And that's the thing we've seen, that through implementing rotational learning, there's all these other soft skills that we start to speak to that we didn't even realize in the very beginning that was happening. Simply as the hybrid agenda forces reading for understanding. There's directions every day, and you need to read the written directions and follow through on them. And how much do we know that that's a skill set that our students need?
That's so true.
Right? So in doing that, we also want you to be aware of that when you create your expectations, that what do students do when they get stuck? There's always going to be a question. There's always going to be, you know, maybe a misunderstanding of some of the directions. You'll become masterful at writing your hybrid agendas. But there are ways that you can put in some strategies that you can use. One of them is called the troubleshooting tips. Another one's called a confusion card. And it's basically a guide that you create that students can go to be able to see if I get stuck. So what are the common troubleshooting tips that you have in your classroom with the technology access that you have in your building? Does the Wi-Fi drop? Does the laptop not start up? What happens if a website is blocked? Starting to think through, you know, if your screen freezes, what do you do? How do you reboot the laptop? If you don't have a headphone set, where can you get another set of headphones? Common questions that students might have that they can learn, that they could actually look at a troubleshooting tip and say, oh, if my laptop shuts down or my screen freezes, this is what I do next. Or if I drop the Wi-Fi, this is how I reconnect it to the Wi-Fi. When all else fails, reboot, right? Like, so what are those kinds of things in there that you can help students with? And then on the back of the troubleshooting tips, you can also have a form that they are forced to fill out as their own tech tip to you. So for example, if there's something wrong with the laptop or there's something wrong with a program that they're using, and they ask the person on the right, and they wrote down what the person on the right said, they asked the person on the left, they wrote down what the person on the left said, and they still can't solve it. But that way they can turn it into you, that you have a way to be able to collect any types of problems that are going on, whether independent or collaborative,
Yeah,
right?
right.
For a place for all of these things to exist.
Well, and I think that serves really as two purposes. Well, in the independent station, I think for the confusion card, it serves definitely as two purposes. One is if a student is talking to someone, you as the teacher sitting up front and direct can see what those students are doing in the room. And if you see students talking, one of the first things you want to do at the very beginning of the year, because again, you want the students to be aware that you're paying attention, even though you're working with students up here in the front, in the back, you're still paying attention to what's happening in the back of the room. So I see Ken talking to his neighbor and I don't see him filling out any cards. So when he circulates around to me in independent or in between stations or at the beginning of the period or at the end of the period, not really the beginning period, the end of the period, I could say, hey, Ken, I noticed that you were talking to your neighbor. Did you fill out, were you stuck on content? Yeah, I was stuck, Mrs. Karen.
I was stuck.
And did you then fill out your confusion card? Oh, no, I didn't fill it out. Ken, you want to fill that out? Remember that the only time that you should be talking in the independent station is when you're stuck. And so that I know that, you should be filling out that card.
And that reminds me next time, man, Mrs. Cairns is watching.
Yeah, so
Right.
that's one of the things is it's giving them permission to talk, right?
Yeah.
If they need to ask a question, we're permitting them to actually talk in that independent station. I think the second and probably the most important part of this confusion card is it really is telling teachers where kids are getting stuck.
Right.
So it could be used for technology, but it also is used oftentimes for the content. So I'm stuck on solving an equation and a certain problem in the book, and Ken can't help me and Sue can't help me, and I'm sitting here. The teacher now has on that form, oh, you know, they can't figure out this problem. Is this a good time that I need to like kind of go over this with the entire class?
Yeah.
So the confusion card really does serve as that, you know, double purpose. One, that, you know, giving them permission to talk, and two, kind of showing the teachers where kids are getting stuck or where the problems are occurring. And this has been really huge, I think, in the beginning.
And teachers have altered it to be what they need.
Oh yeah, it doesn't. It might not look like this. Yeah,
right, right.
Sure.
There are many different ways of to do that from elementary levels.
I love this
through
elementary
secondary.
one.
I know, I love it. Back to those pictures, right? But for students to really talk about how they feel about the lessons.
Yeah,
I think that can be really powerful. So to sum it up, we really wanted to be able to look at some of these key strategies that we've seen that when implemented using these key strategies, our teachers have had the most success in the rotational learning model. So keeping in mind that visual timer within using that hybrid agenda, having clear expectations posted for what students are supposed to do in each one of those rotations, and a way for them to be able to ask questions when they have a question through that troubleshooting tips and through some form of a confusion.